1 second later, the truth could not be hidden. The night was heavy with rain, its endless drumming against the glass windows of the courthouse, masking the whispers of secrets that had been hidden for years. Eleanor Cross, a young investigative journalist with fire in her eyes and exhaustion etched into her face, clutched the leather-bound notebook tighter than she had ever held anything before. Inside its worn pages lay a truth so dangerous, so damning, that 1 second later it could either bring justice to a town drowning in lies or condemn her to silence forever. She had followed trails through shadows, bribed reluctant officials, and risked her own life to piece together the story no one dared to speak out loud. For years, the town of Hollow Creek had thrived on silence, its streets polished and its people smiling. But beneath the whitewashed fences and neatly painted storefronts, a rot spread like ivy, choking every institution. The truth Eleanor uncovered did not belong to one man or one crime. It was a web, a conspiracy woven through judges, police officers, businessmen, and politicians. Every string she pulled led to another darker knot, until she realized the entire town had been built on a foundation of blood and betrayal. She remembered the first clue, a missing persons report that had quietly vanished from police archives. No one spoke of it. No one even admitted it had existed. Yet, there had been a mother, pale and trembling, who whispered Eleanor's name into a phone call at midnight, pleading for someone to listen. That mother had disappeared days later, her house emptied, her belongings auctioned as if she had never lived. The silence had been deliberate. Eleanor knew then that this was not a story of crime alone. It was a story of erasure. Every lead took her deeper into the labyrinth of corruption. Bank records buried beneath fake accounts, land deeds altered with invisible ink, surveillance tapes destroyed seconds before the truth appeared on screen. But even when all traces were erased, 1 second later something always slipped through. A voice, a shadow, a face reflected in the corner of a mirror. Lies could be polished, but they could never be perfected. She thought of Detective Marcus Hale, the only man inside the system who had dared to give her the smallest hint. His eyes, lined with fatigue, had held hers for only a moment as he muttered, "The truth is locked in the files marked unsolved. Look for what they say doesn't exist." Days later, Marcus was found in his car, engine running, windows sealed, a staged suicide written across the scene. Eleanor had cried then, not just for him, but for the knowledge that this town would destroy anyone who tried to speak. Still, she pressed on. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. Anonymous letters began sliding under her apartment door. "Stop now, or you will vanish too." She didn't stop. Tires screeched behind her one night on a deserted road, headlights flaring too close. But she veered into the woods and lived to write another day. Fear had become her constant companion, yet the truth gave her courage greater than terror's grip. The notebook grew heavier with every revelation. Every page inked with testimony, stolen files, photographs smuggled from archives. She carried it close to her chest, because she knew once this was published, Hollow Creek would never be the same. But the notebook was also a target. It was no longer paper, it was a weapon. And weapons are hunted. The town mayor, Harold Garrison, smiled on podiums, shook hands at galas, and donated to schools. But behind his polished speeches was the face of a man who had ordered disappearances, silenced families, and burned records with the precision of a surgeon. Eleanor had seen the proof. Grainy photographs, receipts that traced blood money back to his accounts. He was the king of a rotten empire, and the people called him their savior. Yet even kings fear the truth. She had seen it in his eyes once, across the marble floor of City Hall when their gazes locked. Just for a second, his polished smile faltered, and fear flashed, not of Eleanor, and of the truth she carried. 1 second later it was gone, buried under charm. But Eleanor never forgot. The rain outside grew heavier. In her dim apartment, the typewriter waited, paper rolled in, the keys ready to hammer out history. She had enough evidence now to turn Hollow Creek upside down. But with every letter she typed, she knew death crouched closer. Publishing this meant survival was no longer promised. Yet silence was no longer an option. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Hair damp with sweat, lips pressed thin, eyes carrying centuries of sorrow. She barely recognized the woman who had started this journey months ago, full of idealism. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, scarred, but unbreakable. The truth had shaped her into something new, a weapon forged in secrecy. The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, shadows moved in the rain. Maybe men waiting, maybe just phantoms her mind conjured. The notebook lay on the desk beside her, its spine cracked, its secrets begging to be shouted. She whispered to herself, 1 second later, it all changes. Her phone buzzed once. An unknown number. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The message appeared, we know what you're about to do. Stop, or you won't live to regret it. The words burned on the screen. But instead of fear, fire lit in her veins. She typed harder. The truth was coming. And no one could hide it any longer. The rain hammered louder, as if the sky itself wanted to wash the town clean. Eleanor knew the night was about to split open. And Hollow Creek would never return to silence. Eleanor printed the first draft and slid the warm pages into a manila envelope, her fingers trembling as though she were sealing a verdict. She'd arranged a midnight handoff with a national outlet 2 cities away. If she could get the file to them, the story would be too big to bury locally. She packed the leather notebook, an extra flash drive, and a disposable phone into her satchel, and killed the lights. The rain on the fire escape sounded like footsteps trying to beat her to the door. On the stairwell, a bulb flickered, then blew. Darkness pressed close, thick as wet wool. Halfway down, she heard a door open above and the soft hush of soles on concrete. She quickened, keeping her breathing shallow, counting landings like prayers. At the bottom, a silhouette appeared beyond the glass, broad-shouldered, hat brim low. She didn't look. She pushed through the exit and folded into the storm, letting the rain blur her outline and the city swallow her name. Her car waited under a plane tree, shedding black leaves into gutter currents. She slid in, locked the doors, and wiped rain from her lashes with the back of her hand. As the engine caught, her phone buzzed again. A photo arrived, her own building, her own stairwell, taken seconds earlier from the floor above. "You're late," the caption read. Fear rose like cold water. But she gripped the wheel until her knuckles bleached, whispered, "Drive," and obeyed herself. Hollow Creek at night was a diorama of empty storefronts and lit windows that watched without blinking. As she took County Road 7 out past the mills, the town unspooled into field and timber and then nothing but rain. She replayed voices in her head to stay awake. The mother who vanished, the clerk who cried when he realized what he'd misfiled, Detective Hale telling her to look where absence was loudest. Grief braided with resolve. The braid became a rope. She pulled. 2 miles past the old foundry, headlights bloomed in her rearview, far back but unwavering. At first she told herself it was coincidence. Then the lights matched her acceleration perfectly. When she slowed for the curve by Willow Bridge, they hung back like a patient predator. She killed her interior lights, thumbed the disposable phone on, and texted the outlet editor one word: incoming. The bridge loomed silver in the rain, its trusses echoing thunder. At the midpoint, the pursuing lights surged. A pickup drew alongside, window down, driver's face a shadow with a cigarette ember for an eye. He lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a gesture that pretended friendliness and then veered. A nudge, not a strike, enough to wake the river in her nerves. Eleanor snapped the wheel, skidding through spray, and punched the accelerator. The car fishtailed, corrected, shot off the bridge into the dark like a thrown knife. She didn't go straight to the highway. Instead, she cut down Old Quarry Road, a strip of broken asphalt locals avoided, and killed her headlights for a dozen heartbeats at a time, letting lightning be her guide. Somewhere behind, the pickup lost her or decided the quarry was payment enough for one night. When she stopped, it was under a stand of pines that shook like wet dogs. She breathed, counted to 40, and breathed again. The truth in her satchel throbbed like a living thing. The rendezvous point was a 24-hour laundromat off Interstate 6, a place where nobody remembers faces and everybody minds their own stains. Neon buzzed in the window like an insect trapped in glass. Inside, a woman in a yellow raincoat sat beside a humming dryer, flipping a deck of cards as if dealing to ghosts. Eleanor recognized her from the encrypted avatar. Iris, the editor's fixer. The proof that this wasn't just a local crusade anymore. Envelope, Iris said without looking up. Eleanor slid it across the plastic table, palms slick. Iris cracked the seal, scanned the first page. Then the second. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She nodded once, the quiet liturgy of professionals who know when history has just walked into the room in damp shoes. This runs at 6 a.m. coast to coast, Iris said. You won't be able to go home. Eleanor stared at the rows of washers, mouths full of suds. I don't have a home, she said. And the sentence surprised her with its truth. Iris handed back the leather notebook. Keep your originals, she said. And keep moving. The dryer buzzed. Iris rose, shouldered a duffel that seemed heavier than laundry, and vanished into rain that welcomed her like an old accomplice. Eleanor returned to the car, shoved the notebook beneath the passenger seat, and, out of habit, checked her messages. A new one waited, not from Iris, not from the editor. A video file. When she tapped it, Detective Hale's voice filled the cab, recorded, frayed, intimate. He sat somewhere dim, a motel maybe, one lamp carving a continent of light across his face. If you're seeing this, he said, I'm already a headline they wrote for me. He coughed. You're close, Cross, but you're missing the route. Check the water. The water? She thought of the river that braided through town, feeding the mills, the farms, the taps in every kitchen. She thought of land deeds and health reports she hadn't yet reconciled. She thought of children with unexplained rashes, of a clinic whose records had accidentally burned. The web tightened. At its center, not just money and power, but poison. The truth wasn't only old crimes. It was a current running through every throat in Hollow Creek. She pulled a U-turn so sharp the tires cried out. Instead of fleeing to safety, she aimed back toward town, toward the municipal water facility that squatted behind a chain-link smile and a sign promising clean, proud, safe. The rain eased to a needle-fine mist that made the world look like it was thinking. As she drove, she called the one person who still picked up after midnight. Father Bram, the parish priest who kept copies of everything the town wished to forget. Meet me at the plant, she said. Bring the baptismal records from the last 10 years. He didn't ask why. I'll be there, he said, and hung up with a prayer that sounded like a password. The plant's perimeter lights threw sickly halos into the fog. Eleanor parked among city trucks and slipped through a cut in the fence that had been mended with faith, not metal. Inside, the air smelled of chlorine braided with something metallic and wrong. She moved along the catwalk, rain ticking on corrugated roofs, peered into vats that hummed with the pretense of purity. A clipboard on a hook listed test results so perfect they felt fictional. Perfection is the first lie, she thought, and snapped photos until her phone was a roll of evidence. Footsteps approached, measured, official. She ducked behind a conduit stack and held her breath. 2 men in municipal jackets passed below, their conversation easy as if nothing in the world were amiss. Garrison says sunrise, one murmured. Dump the new batch and print the old numbers. After the press conference, we're ghosts. The other laughed. Been ghosts for years. Their voices faded into the machinery's drone, leaving Eleanor with a sentence that tasted like iron. Garrison says sunrise. A door creaked. Father Bram stepped into the cavernous bay, rain dripping from his coat, a satchel of ledgers thumping against his hip. His spectacles were fogged, his faith unshaken. "Child," he whispered, spotting her. "What in God's name have they done?" Eleanor didn't answer. She was already flipping through baptismal records, tracing clustering surnames, dates, addresses, a map of illness disguised as coincidence. The pattern snapped into focus. Neighborhoods downstream, spikes in infant mortality, families who moved and were never seen again. The water was the story. The water was the weapon. Sirens wailed in the distance, not coming, just reminding. Dawn leaked into the rafters, turning the vats into dull mirrors. Eleanor looked at her reflection and saw a woman no longer afraid of what the truth would cost her. She pulled the disposable phone, opened a live link Iris had left, and spoke into the camera with a voice steadier than the rain. "My name is Eleanor Cross. If you live in Hollow Creek, check your taps. The mayor knows. The records prove it. The truth could not be hidden, and it will not be." The feed climbed the cell towers like a flare. Screens lit up in bedrooms, squad cars, diners prepping for the morning rush. Somewhere, a child's mother woke to the sound of her own name, spoken by a stranger who believed her. Somewhere else, a man in a mansion poured a glass of water and did not drink. Eleanor ended the broadcast and looked at Father Bram. He nodded once and placed a hand on her shoulder, a benediction for the battle already begun. Then the plant's main doors crashed open. Floodlights washed the catwalk in surgical white. Eleanor raised a hand to shield her eyes and saw them. Municipal jackets, private security, men who served the paycheck more devoutly than any creed. At their center, Mayor Harold Garrison stepped forward, raincoat immaculate, smile carved from marble. "Ms. Cross," he said, voice warm as a hearth. "Let's not be theatrical. Come down. You've misread some numbers. We'll correct them together." Eleanor rested one hand on the railing, the other on the leather notebook that had taken her this far. "Numbers don't bury mothers," she said, the words carrying farther than she intended. "Men do." A hush spread under the lights, thin, brittle, dangerous. 1 second later, the first shot shattered the silence. And the town finally heard the sound of its own truth breaking cover. The gunshot cracked like a whip through the chlorine-scented cavern, ricocheting off steel and cement, splitting silence into shards. Eleanor dropped flat against the catwalk, the notebook clutched beneath her chest, breath hitching against metal gone cold. Father Bram dove behind a vat, his satchel of baptismal ledgers tumbling open, pages fanning like frantic wings across the wet floor. For one wild instant, the words written there seemed to hover in the air. Names, dates, the very proof they meant to erase. Garrison lowered his pistol with theatrical calm, smoke trailing like an accusation. "No one needs to die tonight," he said, his voice trained for microphones, not murder. "Just hand me the notebook, and we'll rewrite this. You'll go free, Miss Cross. You can even take the credit for cleaning the water. Imagine that, your name on every headline. But no bodies." His smile cut sharper than his weapon. Eleanor rose slowly to one knee, not in surrender but in defiance. "You've already written enough lies," she spat, voice shaking but clear. "Every child buried in this town is your headline. Every poison glass is your signature." She lifted her phone, its camera still streaming live. "And now the world knows it." The guards shifted uneasily, glancing at the red recording light, then back at Garrison. Fear flickered in their eyes, not fear of Eleanor, but of exposure. The truth had more weight than bullets, and they felt it pressing on their ribs. 1 second later, the chain of obedience began to fracture. Father Bram's voice boomed from the shadows, low but certain. "This is your reckoning, Harold. Repent or drown in the blood of your own lies." His words echoed with the timbre of stained glass and Sunday bells, even as the rain leaked through rusted seams overhead. Garrison's jaw tightened. He raised the pistol again. But his hand trembled, whether from rage or from the sudden realization that history was already slipping beyond his control. Eleanor couldn't tell. She pressed the record button harder, as though sheer will could burn the truth deeper into the world. The floodlights faltered, blinked once. Then again. A blackout rolled through the plant, plunging them into a twilight of emergency strobes. Red light pulsed like a heartbeat, painting faces into masks of horror. Shouts rose, boots clanged. And somewhere, a guard cursed as machinery screamed back to life in an uncontrolled surge. The vats hissed and overflowed, sending poisoned water sloshing across the floor like an invading tide. Eleanor seized the chaos. She vaulted from the catwalk, hitting the wet cement hard, pain ricocheting through her knees. But she didn't stop. She scooped the scattered baptismal pages into her satchel, her hands moving faster than thought, her mind ablaze with the knowledge that each scrap was salvation. Father Bram grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a service door. Behind them, shouts erupted, "Stop them!" But gunfire was drowned in the roar of water breaking its chains. They stumbled into the rain-drenched night, headlights swinging wild as guards gave chase. The town beyond still slept, ignorant that dawn would bring a reckoning centuries overdue. Eleanor and the priest sprinted through mud and gravel, their breaths ragged, their bodies driven by something greater than survival. The certainty that truth, once freed, cannot be buried again. But the notebook grew heavier, as though it carried the weight of every lost child, every poisoned well. Eleanor clutched it to her chest, promising in silence that she would not falter, no matter how dark the path ahead. Beside her, Father Bram muttered prayers stitched with curses, his eyes ablaze with righteous fury. Behind them, Hollow Creek's heart roared with alarm. Sirens shrieked. Floodlights scanned the riverbanks. The town's empire of silence had cracked. And now its masters would unleash everything to stuff the truth back into shadows. Yet 1 second later, Eleanor realized something Garrison never had. Once the world tastes even a drop of truth, it thirsts for more. She skidded to a halt at the edge of the swollen river, the water swollen with storm and filth, rushing black beneath the bridge. Escape lay across, but pursuit thundered close. She turned to Father Bram. "We jump," she said. He nodded once, unafraid. Together they leapt, clutching the notebook above their heads like a fragile ark. The river seized them, cold teeth dragging them under. Pages blurred, ink bled, lungs screamed, but Eleanor surfaced with the satchel clamped between her teeth. She kicked, clawed, fought her way to the far bank. Father Bram emerged beside her, coughing, water dripping from his collar like baptism inverted. They collapsed in weeds, the storm washing blood and truth alike from their skin. Across the river, flashlights combed the banks in vain. Dogs barked, engines revved. But the flood had swallowed Eleanor's trail hole. She lay gasping in the mud, notebook pressed to her chest, her soul screaming with exhaustion and triumph. The truth lived. For now, she turned her face to the sky, where dawn cracked faint and fragile through the storm clouds. 1 second later, she realized Hollow Creek would never again be able to hide in silence. The first bullet hadn't found Eleanor, but it had shattered any illusion of safety left in Hollow Creek. She crouched in the mud, soaked, shivering, yet unyielding. Across the river, Garrison barked orders, his voice cracking like an old speaker. But fewer men obeyed now. Doubt had crept into their bones. They had watched the live stream. They had seen the town's poison exposed. Obedience doesn't survive when the whole world is watching. Eleanor staggered to her feet, clutching the notebook like scripture. "It's out there now," she gasped to Father Bram. "Even if they kill us, the truth is already alive." The priest pressed a trembling hand over hers, eyes gleaming through rain. "Then let's make sure it spreads faster than their lies." They stumbled along the riverbank, chased by the glow of headlights but guided by the faint blue of dawn breaking through the storm. Eleanor's phone buzzed once more. Messages pouring in, strangers she had never met echoing her words, screenshots multiplying. Her voice had broken the dam. Truth was a flood no wall could hold. At City Hall, Garrison clawed at a podium, calling the broadcast slander, blaming rogue elements. But the crowd outside no longer listened. Mothers held photos of their sick children. Fathers shouted names of the vanished. And neighbors turned on one another with questions too long unasked. 1 second later, the town that had been silent for decades found its voice, and it roared. Back on the outskirts, Eleanor collapsed against a half-burned barn, lungs tearing. Father Bram knelt beside her, whispering scripture not for salvation but for strength. "You've torn the veil," he told her. "But tearing it means they'll come harder, faster. You must be ready." Eleanor nodded, tasting blood on her lip, rain on her tongue, and resolve in her chest. The world tilted. Through exhaustion's haze, she saw figures approaching. Neighbors, farmers, even one of the guards who had broken ranks at the plant. They carried nothing but fury and the will to protect. "We saw your stream," one said. "We're with you." Eleanor blinked. The truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to them all. Meanwhile, Garrison retreated to his mansion, curtains drawn, lawyers summoned, his empire crumbling. But power dies slower than people hope. He still had allies, still had teeth, and still believed one more lie might buy him time. He didn't understand what Eleanor now knew. Time, once cracked open by truth, never heals to silence again. By midday, federal cars rolled into Hollow Creek, summoned by the storm she had unleashed. Agents swarmed the plant, seizing vats, hauling ledgers, escorting men in suits with their wrists bound. Cameras multiplied, broadcasting what Eleanor had first whispered alone in a rain-drenched room. Now the world shouted with her. Yet as justice sharpened its blade, Eleanor felt no triumph, only weariness. She sat on the church steps with the notebook still pressed to her heart. "It's over," someone whispered, but she shook her head. "No, it's only begun. Because truth is not a door you open once. It is a floodgate you must hold against tides forever." That night, when the town gathered in the square, candles flickering like fragile stars, Eleanor stood before them, soaked still, exhausted still, yet transformed. She raised the notebook high, not as a weapon now but as proof of survival. "This," she said, her voice echoing against brick and stone, "is not my story. It is yours. It always was." And the crowd, voices trembling, repeated after her. "The truth cannot be hidden." The chant grew until it drowned the last echoes of fear. Children clutched their mothers tighter, old men lifted their hats. And strangers touched shoulders with strangers as if they had all survived the same storm. Garrison was already a ghost, his mansion nothing more than a mausoleum of greed. When the final candle burned low, Eleanor walked the empty streets alone. The rain had ceased. The air smelled not of chlorine, not of poison, but of clean soil and thunder past. She whispered into the silence. 1 second later, it all changed, and for once, the silence whispered back, not with fear, but with peace. And so Hollow Creek began again. Not unscarred, not unbroken, but awake.